The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Cream-colored paper with her name written in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. And Rachel held it in her trembling hands while rain drummed against the windows of the attorney's office and the lawyer across. The desk watched her with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what that envelope contained and what it would do to her. She had not expected to be here, had not expected the call 3 days ago informing her that Nathan Harrington had passed away quietly in his sleep, had not expected the summons to this office for the reading of a will, and most of all had not expected the weight of guilt that crashed over her the moment she heard his name spoken aloud after 5 years of silence between them. Nathan Harrington had been many things in his 74 years. He had been a successful investment banker who retired at 50, with enough wealth to live comfortably for several lifetimes. He had been a widower who lost his wife Elena to a sudden heart attack when they were both in their early 50s, before children had come into their plans. He had been a philanthropist who gave quietly to causes he believed in without seeking recognition or praise. And he had been, for 23 years of Rachel's life, the closest thing to a father she had ever known. The man who found her at age 7 in the county foster system and chose to take her in, to raise her, to give her every advantage and opportunity his wealth could provide, asking nothing in return except that she live a good life and maybe someday pass on the kindness she had received. Rachel could still remember the day they met, could still see the visiting room at the group home with its institutional furniture and fluorescent lighting, could still feel the way her 7-year-old self had sat with shoulders hunched and eyes on the floor, because she had learned by then that adults who came to visit a woman he had met at a charity event or through friends, but nothing ever seemed to progress beyond casual companionship. And Rachel understood as she got older that he had made a choice to devote his life to raising her, to being present in ways that would have been difficult with the complications of blending families or navigating new relationships. He told her once, when she was 16, and feeling guilty about potentially limiting his life, that she had not limited anything but rather had given his life new purpose after Eleanor's death, that raising her had been the greatest privilege and joy of his later years, and that he regretted nothing about the choices he had made to be her father. College had been Rachel's first extended separation from Nathan. 4 years at Columbia studying economics and finance because she wanted to follow in his professional footsteps, to understand the world of investments and markets that he had mastered. Nathan had been proud, had helped her move into her dorm room, had visited once a month and called twice a week, and had celebrated every academic achievement as though it were his own. She came home for holidays and summers, and those reunions were marked by easy conversation and shared meals and the deep comfort of being with someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. Nathan attended her graduation with tears in his eyes, and at the celebration dinner afterwards, he had toasted her future and told her that whatever path she chose, he would support her, that his only wish was for her happiness and fulfillment. The betrayal began so gradually that Rachel could barely identify when it started. When the slow drift away from Nathan became something more deliberate and damaging. After college, she took a position at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan, and the work consumed her in ways she had not anticipated. Long hours and intense pressure, and a culture that valued aggression and results over relationships and balance. She met Marcus Chen during her second year at the firm, a senior analyst who was brilliant and ambitious and charming in ways that made Rachel feel sophisticated and adult. He was 10 years older, divorced, focused entirely on climbing the corporate ladder, and he pursued Rachel with an intensity that felt like validation after years of being Nathan's daughter, of living in the shadow of his success and his expectations, even though Nathan had never explicitly placed expectations on her. Marcus had opinions about everything, strong opinions delivered with confidence that Rachel initially mistook for wisdom. He had opinions about her career and how she should be more aggressive in pursuing promotions, about her wardrobe and how she dressed too conservatively for someone young and attractive, about her schedule and how she spent too much time visiting Nathan in the suburbs when she should be networking in the city. He framed these opinions as concern for her success, as wanting what was best for her. And Rachel, who had spent her entire life trying to prove she deserved Nathan's investment in her, was vulnerable to the suggestion that she was not living up to her potential, that she was being held back by loyalty to someone whose time had passed. The first Christmas, she skipped visiting Nathan, staying in the city with Marcus instead, because he said the holidays were the perfect time to network at parties and events where senior partners would be relaxed and approachable. Felt like a small compromise in service of her career. Nathan had been understanding on the phone, had told her he was proud of her dedication, had said there would be other holidays. But she had heard the disappointment beneath his gracious words and had felt a twist of guilt that she immediately suppressed by telling herself what Marcus kept telling her. that successful people made hard choices, that you could not build a career while still being a child running home to your parent. The next year she skipped Thanksgiving too, and then summer visits became infrequent, and phone calls became shorter and less instinct warning her that what Marcus was proposing crossed lines that should not be crossed. That asking Nathan to endorse a fund for a son-in-law he barely knew felt wrong in ways she could not fully articulate. But Marcus pushed, argued that this was no different from what happened in wealthy families all the time, that connections and introductions were how wealth perpetuated itself, that Nathan would want to help her succeed, and this was a way for him to do that. And eventually Rachel's ambition and her desire to prove herself and her growing dependence on Marcus's approval overwhelmed her doubts. She called Nathan for the first time in months, and she asked if she could come visit, if they could talk about something important. And Nathan had agreed immediately with a warmth in his voice that made Rachel's stomach twist with guilt she immediately suppressed. The visit happened on a Sunday in October, with autumn colors at their peak and the air crisp and bright. Nathan had prepared lunch, simple sandwiches and soup, because he was not an elaborate cook, but he knew Rachel's favorites. And they ate on the porch overlooking the backyard, where the greenhouse stood among beds that Nathan still tended. They talked about ordinary things at first, Rachel's work and Nathan's latest reading obsessions and the changes in the neighborhood. And there was an ease between them that felt like coming home, like slipping back into a relationship that had been dormant but not dead. And then Rachel brought up the investment fund, presented it as Marcus's brilliant idea, explained the opportunity and the potential returns, and asked if Nathan would consider meeting Marcus and potentially introducing them to some of his former colleagues who might be interested in investing. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from open warmth to guarded neutrality. And when Rachel finished, he was quiet for a long moment before asking gentle questions that revealed his deep understanding of finance and his concern about what she was describing. He asked about the fund's strategy and the risk profile and the regulatory oversight. He asked about Marcus's track record and his references and his reputation in the industry. He asked about the due diligence Rachel had done and whether she had consulted with independent advisors about the fund's structure and claims. And with each question, Rachel felt her presentation unraveling, felt the holes and assumptions exposed, felt her own lack of real understanding about what Marcus was actually planning revealed. Finally, Nathan told her with gentleness that somehow made it worse, that he could not endorse the fund or introduce Marcus to his network because what she had described sounded at best highly speculative and at worst potentially fraudulent, that the promised returns were unrealistic and the fee structure was exploitative, and that he would not risk his reputation or his friend's financial security on a venture that raised so many red flags. He told Rachel he was worried about her involvement with Marcus, that from what she had described, Marcus seemed to be using her access to Nathan's connections, and that true partners built things together rather than one person leveraging the other's relationships. He told her he loved her, that nothing would change that if she needed money or help or advice, he was always available, but that he could not and would not support what Marcus was proposing. Rachel's response was anger, sudden and disproportionate, fueled by shame at having Nathan's concerns about Marcus, voiced aloud, and by fear that maybe Nathan was right, and by defensiveness that came from knowing she had compromised herself in ways she did not want to examine. She accused Nathan of being jealous of her relationship, of wanting to keep her dependent on him, of never truly believing she could succeed on her own merit, of holding his generosity over her like a debt that could never be repaid. She said things designed to hurt, running essentially a Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors, while siphoning millions into offshore accounts for himself. The SEC investigation and criminal charges made national news, and Rachel's name was everywhere as the daughter of respected Nathan Harrington, who had somehow become involved in Marcus Chen's fraud. She was not charged criminally because investigators determined she had been used rather than complicit, that Marcus had exploited her naivety and her access to legitimacy without involving her in the actual fraudulent activities. But the professional damage was catastrophic. She lost her job, her reputation, her savings that had been invested in the fund. And Marcus, who disappeared into the legal system facing decades in prison. Rachel moved out of the Manhattan apartment she could no longer afford and into a small studio in Queens, surviving on savings and part-time work while trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that felt comprehensively destroyed. She thought about calling Nathan every day, thought about apologizing and explaining and asking for forgiveness, but shame stopped her every time. Shame at how completely she had been wrong, at how right Nathan had been, at how she had repaid his love with accusation and rejection. She told herself Nathan would not want to hear from her, that she had burned that bridge too thoroughly to rebuild it, that she deserved the isolation and struggle as consequences for her choices. What Rachel did not know, what she would not discover until sitting in that attorney's office with rain against the windows and an envelope in her hands, was that Nathan had been watching from a distance, had followed the news of the fund's collapse and the investigation, had known exactly where she was and how she was struggling, and had made decisions in his final years that would force her to confront everything she had tried to avoid confronting. The envelope contained a letter, pages of Nathan's familiar handwriting, and the attorney told her she needed to read it before they discussed the will. That Nathan had been very specific about the order of revelation. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the envelope and unfolded the pages, and Nathan's voice came through the words as clearly as if he were sitting across from her in his study while she did homework at the corner desk. The letter began without preamble. Nathan's voice, direct and warm, even through handwritten words on cream-colored paper, and Rachel felt tears blurring her vision before she finished the first paragraph. My dearest Rachel, if you are reading this, then I have died, and you have come to this office despite whatever anger or shame or complicated feelings you carry about our last conversation and the years of silence that followed. The fact that you came means something, means perhaps there is still connection between us, despite the distance you created. And I want you to know before anything else that I have never stopped loving you. Not for one moment. Not even when you said things designed to hurt me. Not even when you chose someone who was using you over someone who truly cared for your well-being. You have been my daughter in every way that matters since the day I met you at 7 years old. And nothing you could do or say or choose would ever change that fundamental truth. I know about Marcus Chen and the fund and the collapse and the investigation. I've known where you were and how you were struggling, and it has taken everything in me not to reach out, not to try to fix things, not to use my resources to make your life easier. But I learned something in your absence, something painful but important. I learned that my love for you had sometimes expressed itself as solving your problems, rather than allowing you to face consequences and grow from them. That perhaps I had made your life so comfortable that you never developed the tools to recognize manipulation or defend yourself against people who would exploit your access to wealth and connection. $1 million in total value, and I know that number will shock you given how you have been living, will make you feel guilty and angry and overwhelmed. But I want you to understand why I structured things this way rather than simply rescuing you when the fund collapsed. Money without wisdom is curse rather than blessing. And you were not ready for this inheritance 2 years ago when Marcus was arrested. Were not ready even a year ago when you were still processing the betrayal and the loss. You needed time to understand the difference between wealth and worth, between having resources and being resourceful, between depending on others to solve your problems and developing your own capacity to navigate difficulty. You needed to know that you could survive without Nathan Harrington's money or influence, that you had value and capability independent of what I gave you, that the person you became was not just a product of my investment, but a result of your own choices and efforts and resilience. I hope these past 2 years have taught you that. have shown you that you are stronger than you believed, that you can rebuild from nothing, that your worth is not measured by your bank balance, or your professional title, or your proximity to wealth. The conditions I have placed on your inheritance are these. First, you must live in my house for 1 full year before you can sell it or access the full value of the estate. This is not punishment but opportunity, a chance to reconnect with the place where you grew up, to remember who you were before Marcus, and ambition and insecurity twisted your understanding of yourself and your relationships. The house holds memories that I hope will help you process what happened and why, will remind you of the years when love was simple and safety was certain, and you did not question whether you deserved to be cared for. You may find this requirement painful or inconvenient, but I am asking you to trust that I have reasons rooted in understanding you better than you perhaps understand yourself. Second, you must complete a project that I have left detailed instructions for, a project that will require you to go through my papers and journals and correspondence, to organize my life's records, and in doing so to understand my choices and motivations, and the full story of how you came into my life and why. This is not busy work, but education, a curriculum designed to teach you things I should have taught you while I was alive, but somehow never found the right time or words to convey. My attorney has the instructions and will provide them to you when you are ready. But know that this project will take months and will require you to confront truths about yourself and about me and about what family means. Third, you must use a portion of the inheritance, at least $1 million, to establish something meaningful that serves others, a foundation or scholarship or program that takes what you learned from your mistakes and transforms it into protection or opportunity for people who face similar vulnerabilities. This is the most important condition, the one that matters most to me, because I want you to understand that wealth is responsibility, not just privilege, that having resources creates obligation to those with less, and that the only way to truly honor what I gave you is to pass it forward in ways that multiply its impact beyond your own life. Rachel, I know this letter is hard to read. I know you are crying right now in that attorney's office, feeling overwhelmed by guilt and love, and the weight of conditions that probably seem unfair or manipulative, even though I promise they are neither. But I need you to understand something that I did not say clearly enough when you were growing up, something I should have repeated until you believed it in your bones. You did not need to earn my love. You did not need to prove you deserved what I gave you. You did not need to succeed in any particular way or become any particular person to justify my choice to adopt you and raise you and leave you everything I had. The love was always unconditional, the inheritance was always yours, and nothing you did or failed to do would have changed that fundamental reality. What happened with Marcus was not failure of worthiness, but failure of judgment. And judgment can be learned and improved and rebuilt. You're not broken beyond repair. You are not defined by your worst choices. You are not undeserving of second chances or new beginnings. You are my daughter, the greatest gift of my later life. And I am so proud of the resilience you have shown in these past 2 years. The way you have survived and rebuilt without asking for help. the strength you did not know you had until circumstances demanded you discover it. That strength will serve you now as you navigate the inheritance and the conditions and the work of forgiving you. There is more. Time to wipe her eyes and blow her nose and breathe through the overwhelming surge of grief and love and regret that Nathan's words had unleashed. When she could finally speak, Rachel asked the question that had been building since the first paragraph. Why did he wait? Why did he watch her struggle for 2 years without reaching out? Why did he let her believe he had written her off, when he could have told her any time that he still loved her, still considered her his daughter, still wanted her in his life? Robert's answer was gentle but firm. Nathan believed Rachel needed to discover her own strength, needed to prove to herself that she could survive and rebuild without his resources or intervention, needed to understand the difference between people who loved her and people who used her in ways that could only be learned through experience rather than explanation. Nathan had written periodic updates in his journal about watching Rachel from a distance, about how hard it was not to intervene, about his hope that the pain of consequence would teach lessons that comfort never could. Robert explained the inheritance structure in detail, and the numbers were even more staggering than the letter had suggested. The house was worth approximately $2 million, given the neighborhood's appreciation over the decades. The investment portfolio was worth nearly $6 million, conservatively managed and consistently profitable. There were savings and life insurance and other assets that brought the total to just over $8 million. All of it would belong to Rachel, free and clear, once she satisfied the conditions. 1 year living in the house and completion of the project. Nathan had designed an establishment of something meaningful that served others with at least $1 million. The project Nathan had outlined was extensive. A complete organization and digitization of his personal papers. Journals, correspondence, and records spanning 50 years. He had left detailed instructions for how he wanted things categorized and preserved. But embedded in those instructions were prompts and questions designed to make Rachel engage deeply with the material rather than simply processing it mechanically. She would need to read his journals, would need to understand his thinking and motivations, would need to discover things about her own adoption and Nathan's relationship with Elena and the choices he made in raising her. The project would take months of sustained work, and it was clearly designed to be therapeutic as much as practical. A way for Rachel to process her grief and guilt while simultaneously understanding Nathan more completely than she had when he was alive. Robert handed Rachel a key to the house and told her Nathan had kept it maintained and ready for her, that utilities were paid through the estate and would continue for the year, that she could move in whenever she was ready. He also gave her a modest monthly stipend that would be available immediately for living expenses, enough to cover food and basics, but not enough to live extravagantly. Another of Nathan's intentional choices, designed to keep her focused on the work rather than distracted by sudden wealth. He told her that Nathan had updated his will every 6 months for the past 2 years, always maintaining the same basic structure, but adding details and refinements as he thought more deeply about what Rachel needed versus what she might want. Rachel left the attorney's office in a daze, walking through rain that had softened to drizzle, and she stood on the sidewalk, trying to absorb everything that had just been revealed. Nathan had loved her through everything. Nathan had forgiven her completely. Nathan had been watching and caring even when she thought he had written her off. Nathan had left her everything, but structured it in ways designed to heal her rather than simply enrich her. The weight of it was almost unbearable. The recognition of how completely she had misunderstood and misjudged. How her insecurity and Marcus's manipulation had destroyed years that could have been spent realize. Rachel opened the first journal with hands that still trembled, and she began reading Nathan's entries from 24 years ago. And what she discovered in those pages would change everything she thought she knew about her own story and Nathan's motivations and the secret that he had kept all these years. The secret that explained why his love had been so unconditional and his forgiveness so complete. The secret that his will would reveal fully only after she had done the work of understanding the context and history that made the revelation meaningful rather than simply shocking. The journals detailed Nathan's grief after Elena's death, his struggle with depression and purposelessness, his therapy sessions where he processed loss and tried to imagine a future worth living. They documented his growing conviction that he needed to do something meaningful with his wealth and his time, something that honored Elena's memory while also giving his own life direction and purpose. They revealed his research into adoption and foster care, his consultation with social workers and psychologists, his careful consideration of what age child he was prepared to parent and what kind of background and needs he could realistically handle. And they documented his first visit to the group home where Rachel lived, his observation of several children, his growing certainty that this particular 7-year-old girl with haunted eyes and hunched shoulders was the one. Was his daughter waiting to be found and claimed and loved into wholeness? But there was something else in the journals, something Rachel did not expect and could not immediately process. References to Elena's wishes and Elena's plans and Elena's specific request before she died. Nathan had written about a conversation he and Eleanor had after her first heart attack, years before the fatal one, when they discussed mortality and legacy and what they wanted their lives to mean. Elena had told him that if something happened to her before they had children, she wanted Nathan to adopt, wanted him to take a child who needed family and give them everything they would have given their biological children. She had been specific about it, had made him promise, had told him that love multiplied rather than divided, and that giving life meaning through parenthood was possible regardless of biology or timing. Nathan had promised, and when Elena died suddenly 5 years later, he had honored that promise by finding Rachel and becoming her father. Rachel read through the night, unable to stop, moving through journals chronologically, and watching Nathan's transformation from grieving widower to nervous adoptive father to confident parent who loved her fiercely and intentionally. She read about his doubts and mistakes and learning curve, about nights when she had nightmares and he did not know how to comfort her, about parent-teacher conferences where he felt inadequate and out of his depth, but the slowly growing certainty that adopting Rachel was the best decision he had ever made, and that she had saved him as much as he had saved her. She read about his pride in her accomplishments, and his worry about her insecurities, and his recognition as she got older that she struggled with feeling worthy of love, and how he tried unsuccessfully to address that through words when perhaps only experience. And time could teach such lessons. The journals from the years of her relationship with Marcus were painful to read, documenting Nathan's growing concern and his careful attempts to express worry without pushing Rachel away. His recognition that Marcus was manipulating her and his frustration at being unable to make Rachel see it, his hurt at her growing distance, and his determination to keep doors open even when she was closing them. He had written extensively about their last conversation, about the things she said and how much they hurt, but also about his understanding of where her anger came from, and his immediate decision to forgive her even as he grieved the relationship entry with heart pounding and tears already forming, because she knew whatever came next would be profound and transformative. The entry was dated just a year ago, and it began with Nathan writing directly to Rachel, as though he knew she would be reading this after his death. My darling Rachel, there is something I have never told you. Something I should have revealed years ago, but kept hidden, because I feared it would burden you or change how you understood our relationship, or make you feel obligated in ways I never wanted you to feel. But you deserve the truth, and understanding it will perhaps help you understand why my love has been so absolute, why I forgave you so completely for the things you said, why nothing you could ever do would make me stop seeing you as my daughter and the greatest gift of my life. When Eleanor died, she was 3 months pregnant. We had not told anyone yet because we were waiting until the second trimester, but we knew, and we were so happy after years of trying and beginning to accept that biological children might not be possible. When the heart attack happened and she died, I lost not just my wife, but the child we had been expecting, the future we had been planning, everything I thought my life would be. The grief was unspeakable, doubled and compounded, and for a long time I did not think I could survive it. When I began considering adoption years later, honoring Elena's wish that I become a parent regardless of her absence, I was drawn to you immediately when I first saw you at that group home. You were 7 years old, the same age our daughter would have been if Elena had survived and carried to term, and the child had grown up. You had brown eyes like Eleanor's, and a seriousness that reminded me of how Elena approached the world. And something in me recognized you, saw in you the daughter I had lost before she was born, felt in my chest the certainty that you were meant to be mine, that fate or God or whatever force governed such things was giving me back what had been taken, not as replacement, but as continuation. If this story is stirring something in you, reminding you of regrets you carry, or forgiveness you need to seek, or love you've taken for granted, please subscribe and share in the comments. These stories of complicated families and second chances matter because they show us that it's never too late to come home, never too late to make things right. Never too late to accept the love that's been waiting for us all along. I have never told you this because I did not want you to feel like you were a replacement or a substitute. Did not want you to carry the weight of representing someone who was lost. You have always been yourself, Rachel, entirely and completely your own person. And I have loved you for who you are, not for who you reminded me of or represented. But understanding this truth might help you understand why I could never stop loving you. Why no betrayal or rejection could break the bond I felt from the moment I met you. Why my forgiveness was instantaneous and complete. You were not just a child I chose to adopt. You were my daughter returning to me in different form. A gift from Elena beyond death, the family I was meant to have arriving through unexpected channels, but arriving nonetheless. I hope this knowledge does not burden you, but rather frees you, helps you understand that you have never needed to earn or justify or prove yourself worthy of my love. You were always my daughter, always meant to be part of my life. Always the answer to grief and loss, and the question of how to go on living after everything important seemed to end. Raising you was not charity or obligation or even choice in the ordinary sense. It was destiny, fulfillment, the completion of something that began when Elena got pregnant and that continued through tragedy into the joy of finding you and bringing you home and watching you grow into the remarkable woman I always knew you would become. Rachel closed the journal and sat in Nathan's study, surrounded by boxes of his life's records and memories, and she understood finally and completely that she thousands of dollars donated quietly every year to foster care organizations and scholarship funds, causes he supported without publicity or recognition. She found his investment strategies meticulously documented, the conservative, careful approach that had grown his wealth steadily while avoiding the kind of risk and speculation that Marcus had pursued, and she understood finally the wisdom of Nathan's refusal to endorse Marcus's fund, the expertise that had recognized immediately what Rachel's ambition had blinded her to seeing. She found photographs from before her adoption, pictures of Nathan and Elena young and in love, wedding photos and vacation snapshots, and the casual documentation of a marriage that had been genuinely happy until it was cut short by sudden death. She found hospital records from Elena's first heart attack, the one that had prompted their conversation about mortality and legacy, and she found the letter Elena had written to Nathan during her recovery. The letter where she made him promise to adopt if she died before they could have children, where she told him that love was not diminished by biology, and that giving a child family was sacred work, regardless of how that child came into your life. Among the papers, Rachel found something she had not expected, a folder labeled with her name and filled with documents related to her adoption. There were social worker reports from her time in foster care, heartbreaking accounts of a small girl who had been through multiple placements, who had learned not to trust adults or expect stability, who had developed defensive mechanisms that made her difficult to place despite her intelligence and underlying sweetness. There were psychological evaluations done before Nathan was approved as an adoptive parent, assessments of his readiness and capability and understanding of trauma-informed parenting. There were notes from Nathan's meetings with therapists and social workers as he prepared to bring Rachel home. His questions about how to help her feel safe, how to build trust, how to love someone who had learned that love was temporary and conditional. Most devastating were Nathan's early journals documenting the first months after Rachel came to live with him. His uncertainty about whether he was reaching her, his fear that he was failing to provide what she needed, his gradual recognition that healing took time measured in years, not months, and that his job was simply to be consistent and present and patient. While Rachel learned slowly that this placement was different, that this adult would not disappoint or abandon her, that safety could be permanent. Rachel read these entries through tears, seeing her own childhood from Nathan's perspective, understanding how much invisible work he had done to create the environment where she could finally relax into being loved. She found the folder that Nathan had labeled for Rachel's project, with detailed instructions about what he wanted her to do with different categories of papers. Some were to be scanned and preserved digitally, others donated to archives that collected materials related to investment history or philanthropic work, others simply organized for her own reference. But embedded in these instructions were prompts that required Rachel to engage with the content. Questions Nathan wanted her to answer about his life and choices, reflections he wanted her to write about what she learned and how it connected to her own experiences. The project was less about creating an organized archive than about creating a curriculum through which Rachel would process grief and guilt and come to new understanding of herself and her relationship with Nathan. One instruction asked Rachel to read all of Nathan's journals from the year she went to college. Through the year, the fund collapsed, and to write a reflection about what she learned about his perspective on her choices. And identifying gaps, thinking about what would have helped her avoid Marcus or recover more quickly from his betrayal. She consulted with social workers and therapists and people who worked in foster care, and gradually a vision emerged for a program that would provide financial literacy and relationship education for young adults aging out of foster care, teaching them skills Nathan had taught Rachel, but that many foster youth never learned, helping them recognize manipulation and exploitation, giving them tools to protect themselves from people who would use their vulnerabilities and isolation against them. She named it the Elena and Nathan Harrington Foundation for Foster Youth Empowerment, honoring both the woman whose wish had started Nathan's journey toward adoption and the man who had fulfilled that wish by becoming Rachel's father. She funded it with $2 million, twice what Nathan had required, because she recognized that nothing she did with the money would be more important than this. that this was how she repaid Nathan's investment in her. Not by achieving career success or accumulating wealth, but by ensuring other vulnerable young people received the protection and education she wished she had valued when Nathan tried to provide it. The work of establishing the foundation connected Rachel with people she would not have met otherwise. Social workers and former foster youth and therapists who worked with adoption trauma. And through these connections, she began to build a community and purpose that had nothing to do with investment banking or wealth accumulation, and everything to do with service and meaning. She found herself energized by this work in ways her career had never energized her. Found satisfaction in creating something that mattered beyond profit margins and returns. Found that Nathan's love had planted seeds in her that were finally flowering now that she had the wisdom and humility to nurture them. 6 months into living in Nathan's house, Rachel received a letter forwarded from her old address in Queens, and she recognized the return address as the federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. Her first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but something made her hesitate, some recognition that perhaps closure required confronting rather than avoiding. She opened the letter to find 3 pages of Marcus's handwriting, and the content was not what she expected. It was not an apology or an excuse or an attempt to justify what he had done. It was a confession and an acknowledgement. Marcus writing that he had used Rachel deliberately, had recognized her insecurity and her access to Nathan's network, and had exploited both. Had never loved her, but had performed love because it served his purposes, and that he was writing now not to ask forgiveness, but to give her the truth he had hidden behind charm and manipulation. Marcus wrote that Rachel should know she had not failed to see through him because she was stupid or naive, but because he was skilled at deception. That he had targeted her specifically because Nathan's refusal to have anything to do with the fund meant Marcus needed another way to access legitimacy and respectability, and that Rachel's desperate need to prove herself independent of Nathan had made her perfect for his purposes. He wrote that she should not waste time feeling guilty about what happened, because he would have found someone else, if not her. That predators like him existed and would continue to exist, and the only defense was education and awareness of the kind Nathan had tried to provide, and she had rejected. He wrote that the greatest gift she could give herself was to accept that she had been targeted and used, rather than being complicit or foolish, and to focus on becoming someone who could recognize and resist such manipulation in the future. The letter was strangely liberating, despite coming from someone who had destroyed years of her life, because it removed She told him the house was full of life and purpose, that the rooms where she had been raised now served foster youth finding their way toward independence, that his study, where she had done homework as a child, now held staff meetings and mentorship sessions, that his love had multiplied through her choices in ways he could not have predicted, but would have celebrated. She told him she missed him every day, but carried him with her always. In the work she did, and the choices she made, and the love she offered to young people who reminded her of herself at 7, hungry for family and afraid to hope, driving away from the cemetery as afternoon light turned gold and shadows lengthened across the grounds. Rachel felt the full weight and beauty of having been chosen by Nathan Harrington, of having been loved unconditionally through her worst choices, of having been forgiven completely and given inheritance designed to heal rather than simply enrich. She felt gratitude beyond measure for the father, who had found her at 7 and raised her, and then continued parenting beyond death through letters and conditions and projects that taught what words had not conveyed. She felt peace with the years lost to Marcus, and anger and misunderstanding, because those years had taught her finally to value what she had taken for granted, to recognize manipulation because she had been manipulated, to appreciate unconditional love because she had rejected it and been welcomed back anyway. Most of all, she felt purpose, the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with the resources and love Nathan had given her. The knowledge that every young person served by the foundation was Nathan's legacy multiplied. Every life changed was proof that his love had not died with him, but continued working in the world through her choices and commitments. She understood finally that this was what Nathan had wanted most. Not gratitude or recognition or even reconciliation before death, but the certainty that she would eventually transform pain into purpose, would use the inheritance to serve others, would become the woman he had always believed she could be. Someone who honored love by passing it forward to people who needed exactly what she had needed. Family and safety, and the revolutionary knowledge that they were worthy of love, not because they earned it, but simply because they existed and someone had chosen to see them and claim them and care for them, without condition or limit or end. If Rachel's journey from betrayal to redemption has touched you, if you're carrying guilt about someone you pushed away, or regret about love you didn't value until it was gone, please subscribe and share your story in the comments. We all make mistakes. We all push away people who love us. We all waste time we can never recover. But it's never too late to honor that love by becoming someone who passes it forward, who transforms regret into service, who proves that even our worst choices can teach us to make better ones. Nathan's love didn't end when Rachel betrayed him. It didn't end when he died. It multiplied through her choices into thousands of lives touched and changed. That's the power of unconditional love. That's the gift we can all give and receive. That's what it means to truly come home, not to a place, but to the truth of being loved beyond measure, beyond mistakes, beyond anything we can do to earn it or anything we can do to lose it. Subscribe, share, and remember that it's never too late to accept the love you've been given and pass it forward to someone who needs exactly what you needed, exactly what someone gave you, exactly what love demands we do with the gifts we receive.